Immigration reform is finally before Congress. What are the chances for meaningful enactment?
You can look at this bill, or even the summary of it, and you can almost see who wrote what, which party wrote what, and that's necessary for the hawks.
Immigration reform, let the battle begin. And a look at what experts say on another key issue in the news, gun control and mental health treatment.
I don't see why any law-abiding citizen would object to having a background check. Instant background checks, they don't take very long. I've seen purchases where there's question because of, Social Security number or something like that, where they may take a day or two to get in.
A close-up look at two hot issues. It's Arizona Week.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support. Once again, your moderator, Michael Chiha.
The Senate Judiciary Committee opened hearings today on immigration reform and will resume them on Monday. We'll start tonight with a brief look at the bill's key points from our friends at the PBS NewsHour, followed by PBS NewsHour Margaret Warner's interview with one of the bill's sponsors, Illinois Senator Dick Durbin.
The Gang of Eight's bill would establish a pathway to citizenship for the estimated 11 million undocumented people currently in the country. The process would take 13 years, and applicants would have to pay a fine and back taxes, learn English, and pass a criminal background check, among other hurdles. But before that system can even be set up, certain security goals must be met, including improvements to the border fence. We turn to Illinois Democrat Dick Durbin. He's the majority whip in the Senate and a member of the so-called Gang of Eight. Welcome, Senator Durbin. You all have been working on this nonstop since the start of this Congress. How hard was it to forge this compromise?
This wasn't easy. You have 8 willful members of the U.S. Senate, 4 from each party, each with a point of view. And we came together determined to put together a comprehensive immigration bill, task which has eluded other senators in the recent past. We got it done. It's an 848-page bill. I think it's a good offering, a way to improve this immigration system in a lot of different facets.
Well, give us a flavor of what it was like in that room. I gather you had something like 24 meetings.
Well, there were nice, kind, and quiet meetings and more eruptive meetings. As I said today to John, I said Mount McCain erupted a few times, but fortunately no one was injured, and we got back on path in a hurry. So despite the strong feelings that we each brought to this issue, because it is so important to each of us and to our country, I think in the end we've struck a good balance. Well, I've never been on a stage at a press conference announcing a bill with Richard Trumka, the president of the AFL-CIO, and Grover Norquist. It's the most unusual coalition of business and labor, conservatives and liberals, religious leaders, leaders from all walks of life who have come together to back this bill. I think we've got a chance because it is so bipartisan and has such a broad base of support.
For a closer look at the immigration reform effort, I'm joined in our studio by Ted Robbins, Southwest correspondent for NPR. Welcome, Ted.
Good to be here, Michael.
Let's walk a little bit through some of the aspects of the immigration reform proposal beyond the details that we just saw from PBS. More border security is being called for, and an accountability system to make sure the border is secure. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the accountability system is sort of two-tiered. The Senate proposal calls for virtually 100% knowledge of who is crossing. And then there is the second part of that is they're calling for 90% rate of catching those people who we know are crossing.
And they have a formula that allows them to figure out if they've hit the 90% mark, right? Complex formula.
It's not that complex. It's the number of people crossing minus the apprehensions and the getaways, the people they know or the turnbacks rather, the people who have turned around. That leaves you with the getaways. And the Border Patrol has told me that they're about 85% right now of catching those they know who have crossed. Next question is, how do they know who they didn't cross? That's the part that they need to work on. That's the first part of that formula. And it could require 24/7 surveillance with drones, with sensors, with all the stuff they have now and more.
And the bill calls for spending money on more technology to be able to do at least some of that, correct?
Well, it could be up to $7 billion over 10 years, and it's not just technology, it's also infrastructure. So that it sort of doesn't demand more fencing, but it says that they ought to investigate more fencing. The rest of it is, that's right, the rest of it, there's an increasing reliance on air assets, drones, fixed wing, some helicopter, although frankly the sequestration and the budget cuts have already cut into some of that. So, you know, that probably the money is going to go toward that.
And more boots on the ground, 3,500 more officers?
3,500 more officers. Those are not Border Patrol agents. Those are customs. What they're now used to call customs officers at the ports of entry, now they call them field operations officers, which has been a kind of a problem for a long time, that all of these resources have been put in between the ports of entry at Nogales, Naco, Douglas, all along. And relatively, the need is now, it's now recognized you need, for also trade and travel, you need people at the ports of entry. So that's where they would put the 3,500 people.
And the key thing about border security is that in Arizona and Texas especially, it's a political issue. So they have to push that forward, and they've added into the bill a trigger on border security to allow the legalization process.
Right.
Talk about that.
Well, I think that's clearly a Republican. You can look at this bill, or even the summary of it, and you can almost see who wrote what. Which party wrote what, and that's necessary for the hawks, the immigration hawks, and the people who have been pushing that end of things. That's the only way they're going to get it through.
And so when we get to the 90%, that allows the legalization process for the estimated 11 million who are here illegally to start falling into place.
Well, they'll have this provisional status once the Secretary of Homeland Security presents a plan. Then they'll have the opportunity for this provisional legal status. So they'll be here legally, but then in order to get a green card, permanent resident status, and then eventually if they choose citizenship, it would require that trigger. I think the two things that we need to ask here, well, connected. What's the goal? Is it border security or is it stopping illegal immigration? And you know, that appears to be the same thing, but it's not, in the sense that 30 to 50% of the people in the country illegally right now or without proper documents are estimated to have come legally through those ports of entry, airports, seaports, land ports, and overstayed their visas. So they didn't, so, you know, you could build a 100-foot fence 2,000 miles wide, and you wouldn't be stopping those people.
So most of them are in the country now illegally, came legally, many of them probably in the workforce. So the trigger there is to increase the employer enforcement aspects of this,
right,
which were a key part of the 1986
right,
legislation that never really bore fruit. Is
right,
that correct?
Right. Well, it's not a trigger. It's because actually there is no, that isn't a trigger. I mean, there's no quid pro quo. You know, if this happens, then we'll let them. This is a separate part. So they're going to make E-Verify, which is the online portion of if you apply for a job and you have to present that. There's a form you have to present with 2 forms of identification. They're going to make the electronic version mandatory. And it is mandatory in a number of states already, including Arizona. And then they're also going to make biometrically secure Social Security cards, photo ID. They're going to make it harder to get a job, in essence.
And in '86, when they passed immigration reform the last time, and the amnesty, the now infamous amnesty with 3 million people legalized, they said the employer enforcement or the employer sanctions would be the key to all of that. Those didn't come about. What's the odds they're going to come about this time?
I didn't see, the one area where I didn't see an increase was for ICE. They're increasing customs, but ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that they're the interior force that enforces these. I didn't see any increase in funding for them in the bill.
They would be the ones going into employers to
Right.
check to see if they have legal workers.
Right. And though you can do audits, there's a call for the Labor Department and the Social Security Administration to be involved in all this. So, you know, but I didn't see anything in there for that.
Let's talk a little bit about the political process here. This will take a while, as the Gang of Eight members have acknowledged. We saw Senator Durbin a little earlier on the clip from PBS say that he gives it pretty good chances because it's bipartisan in nature. From the point of view of someone who covers the immigration issue pretty intensively along our border, what are the factors there that are going to have an impact on the politics?
Well, I haven't heard, and this is a good sign if you want this to pass, I haven't heard the same kind of Sturm und Drang over this as I have, as we did over gun control, for instance. You know, the lines are not nearly as stark. I think, as I said, you can almost see who wrote what in the bill, and that's a good sign. And also, you've been hearing since it came out, a lot of people on both sides either loving it or hating it. So the fact that it's on both sides is a good sign.
And about a half a minute remaining, Ted. In that time, Jeff Flake, John McCain, Arizona's Republican senators, both in the Gang of Eight, both pushing this hard from their perspectives. What does that say about what will happen in Arizona, one of the leading anti-illegal immigration states?
Well, you know, the state's changing, because let's remember that the political trigger for all this was the loss in last November to the Democrats by the Latino population of this country voting for Democrats, not Republicans. That was the political trigger in the first place. And I think in Arizona, the demographics are changing slowly, but changing as well. And I think that's the real impetus for the quick turnaround from last year to this year.
Ted Robbins, Southwest correspondent for NPR. Thanks for speaking with me.
You're welcome.
We'll be following immigration reform as it works its way through Congress, and we'll bring you updates as appropriate. Now another hot legislative topic, gun control, and a concurrent issue, mental health treatment. Tonight, we bring you conversations with a police officer and a mental health expert to explore the issues in some depth. We'll start with Arizona Week reporter-intern Rebecca Bruckman's interview with South Tucson Police Lieutenant Jeff Inorio.
What laws do you need to guard against gun violence?
You know, some of the current legislation that's going on right now with universal background checks is one that we strongly support. You know, there's loopholes there with people purchasing guns at gun shows and such where they're not subject to background checks. I believe that you know, a good background check might weed out some of the people that should not have guns. So we are supporting that.
Is there legislation on the state or federal level that you feel would be helpful in protecting public safety?
You know, there's quite a few gun laws that are currently on the books that they probably don't enforce as often as they should. I believe that they need to put some teeth into these laws and prosecute to the fullest on you know, any crimes involving guns. The current legislation with you know, universal background checks would be helpful to us.
Are people with mental illness of special concern to police?
Sure they are. You know, we deal with a large population down here in South Tucson. We have a lot of services available to them, mental health services, as well as homeless shelters and such. We need to have something that, you know, it's a touchy subject when it comes to mental health, and you know, people get these grand illusions of mental insane asylums back in the 40s, but there has to be something to deal with with the mentally ill once they're diagnosed or we recognize that there's some issues there.
So what procedures does your department currently use when someone is identified as mentally ill?
All of our officers have been trained in dealing with mentally ill persons and how to deal with them. The courts are in the process of, along with the Center for Court Innovations, to set up some type of programs instead of incarcerations. If we recognize that they need treatment, either addiction treatment or mental health treatment, that in lieu of jail time, we can, if they're willing to partake in the treatment, they will suspend the sentence and do it that way. We have a lot of resources that are available to us. The Crisis Response Center, which we deal with quite often, and through the old Sam Heck, once we recognize somebody that is having some issues, that's not acting appropriately, we usually get one of those agencies involved as well.
Do you think law enforcement need more training on how to address behavioral health issues?
Absolutely. It never hurts. I think that we are pretty well versed. I think our department actually, since we deal with so many mentally ill, I think that our agency probably has an upper hand from other agencies. But it's always good because certain people, you have to deal with certain mental illnesses differently than you would a person that doesn't have mental issues. And there's some things as far as how to approach them, how to talk to them. Somebody that have schizophrenia, you might want to deal with them a little bit differently than some other problems. And you have to be able to recognize that they're in crisis and what's the best thing to do for that person at that time.
Are there adequate safeguards in place to ensure that guns stay out of the hands of violent individuals?
That's a $1 million question today. All too often, people are getting guns, and there's enough guns on the street that, there's a lot of illegal guns out there as well. We always hear of straw purchases too, where somebody that knows that they can't go in and purchase a gun because they're a convicted felon, they will pay somebody to go in and get a gun. What we need to do is we need to enforce the laws that are on the books to really punish those people that are doing that. And then, like I said, if a gun's used in a crime, then make sure that they're prosecuted to the fullest degree on those things.
Should universal background checks be required in regards to gun purchases?
I think so. I don't see why any law-abiding citizen would object to having a background check. Instant background checks, they don't take very long. I've seen purchases where there's question because of, Social Security number or something like that, where they may take a day or two to get in. But somebody doesn't need a gun right on the spot. But with the instant check, you usually have them within 15, 20 minutes anyway. So, is it an inconvenience for somebody to go back down to the gun store the next day to pick up the gun? I don't think so. So really any law-abiding citizen shouldn't object to having, background, and that would prevent some of the people from getting some guns.
Do the current laws reflect public opinion and concern in regards to gun violence?
I guess it depends on what side of the coin you're on that one. I think that the vast majority do recommend or support, universal background checks. We'd like to see something within the background check of checking on mental illness, and we're not sure how that's going to happen. With our HIPAA laws and everything else, it's kind of hard to flag somebody as mentally ill. So, there's some things that have to be worked out in that detail.
What specifically is in the HIPAA laws that would prevent somebody from identifying?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to try to get into the HIPAA laws, but I know that, certain things can't be released by, doctor-patient confidentiality. But I do believe that if somebody has been hospitalized for some mental illness and they show a propensity for violence, then we have to do something with it. We got to quit burying our head in the sand and saying that, and making this problem, go away. There's people out there that are mentally ill. There's people out there that probably will never receive enough treatment to make themselves sane again, and we need to recognize that.
As we heard Lieutenant Inorio say, more police training and other resources for mental health are needed. Here to speak with me about what services are available and how the behavioral health community works with law enforcement is Vanessa Seaney, Chief Operating Officer of the Community Partnership of Southern Arizona. The partnership administers training and preventive and treatment services for behavioral health in our region. Welcome, Ms. Seany.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate being here today to talk about behavioral health services.
Talk a little bit about in detail what the Cpsa does in Southern Arizona.
Yes, Community Partnership of Southern Arizona is the Regional Behavioral Health Authority for Pima County. We are designated by the state of Arizona, specifically the Arizona Department of Health Services, the Division of Behavioral Health, to oversee and administrate publicly funded behavioral health services in a system of care. We were founded in Tucson and have been in existence since 1995. On any given day, we serve around 30,000 members in continuous care, and we're also responsible for crisis services for anyone in Pima County, regardless of insurance or income.
That's a big load. Are there enough resources available from the state and private institutions to be able to handle what's needed?
Well, certainly we have excellent providers in our community, but there's always a need for more resources, particularly in behavioral health services. The need is great, and we believe that we do an excellent job with our system of care, providing services. We collaborate closely with the state of Arizona, but we also collaborate as a community very closely with the City of Tucson and Pima County, as well as stakeholders throughout our community, including law enforcement.
And I'm glad you mentioned law enforcement because we want to talk about that in good detail. As we heard from the officer from South Tucson, there's always a greater need for law enforcement to have training to be able to deal with behavioral health issues. And those are at the fore with the Newtown and the Tucson shootings and other issues where mental health was an aspect of that. What does Cpsa do to work with law enforcement specifically in training regard?
You know, since the beginning in 1995, when we were first founded, we recognized that it was critically important to have a very strong relationship with law enforcement. In fact, because of that reason, we actually have a whole team of 6 staff that are a criminal justice team that work closely within the criminal justice system and with law enforcement. The criminal justice team, along with law enforcement, works on policy, on collaborating related to program design, enhancements to ensure our community is safer, but training as well. Specifically, the 2 trainings that we are involved in with law enforcement include crisis intervention training that had actually been dormant for a couple of years, and in 2009 really became reactivated with the support of Tucson Police Department, specifically Sergeant James Kirk, and our criminal justice manager, Kate Lawson. So that training is extremely popular. We have about 50 officers that take it at any one given point in time, and we've trained about 500 officers. It's quite a commitment because it's a week-long, 40-hour training that focuses on behavioral health recognition of signs and symptoms, as well as intervention when police officers are to intervene with someone who has a behavioral health issue or crisis.
And then you have mental health first aid, as you call it. Tell us a little bit about that and who undergoes that training.
Cpsa has offered mental health first aid, which is really likened to a CPR class. And we started offering this back in 2011, even before the January 8th tragedy. But since the January 8th tragedy, we immediately mobilized and started providing more mental health first aid training. And we've actually have trained 1,500 people since that time. Mental health first aid training is focused also on helping persons recognize signs and symptoms of mental health. People from the community. We have trained law enforcement, and we actually will now be having a specialized training in mental health first aid for law enforcement. Those 2 persons that I mentioned earlier, Sergeant Kirk and Kate Lawson, became trainers and are going to start providing mental health first aid, specializing for law enforcement in the next few months.
How important is it for you to get these trainings out there in a quick fashion You mentioned 500 officers have undergone it. Well, there are a couple thousand law enforcement officers just in the immediate Tucson area.
It's very important, and we provide the training as much as we can. There's one being offered in May, and law enforcement signs up for those trainings very quickly as well. The mental health first aid also is a very popular training that people sign up for very quickly as well.
And anyone in the community can sign up for that?
Yeah.
That's not just for law enforcement, right?
No, anyone in the community can sign up, and in fact we have trainings that are happening on a regular basis monthly. Now that's a shorter training, it's 12 hours, and there is a specialty related to veterans, also related to youth, and we're going to be rolling out a mental health first aid training in Spanish in the next few months. And it's very popular, particularly with community stakeholders. We've done many trainings for educators, for faith-based communities, and we continue to publish those trainings on our website, and people can sign up for those.
You've talked a lot about crisis intervention, first aid, which implies crisis to me. What about prevention? What does the agency do to foster prevention of behavioral health issues?
Well, you may be aware that in 2006, we were very fortunate that our voters in Pima County approved a bond to build and implement a psychiatric urgent care that opened in August of 2011. This center is now receiving national recognition for the array of crisis services that are provided there. It really is a community-wide resource for anyone in crisis. We have a command and control center, we call it, crisis line that people can call 24/7 that is answered by behavioral health professionals, and that phone number is 622-6000. And just to share with you, last month we took 15,000 crisis calls out of that center.
I have to stop you there. We're out of time. Thank you so much, Vanessa Seaney of the Community Partnership of Southern Arizona.
Thank you, Michael.
That's our program for Friday, April 19th, 2013. Next Friday, we'll take a look at a new study on how career and technical education programs are filling a big niche in Arizona's economy, and at some who have benefited from the trainings. For Arizona Week, I'm Michael Chihak.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.